Hi guys, Jake here, and today we're back for another special episode of Conversations in Context, where we take a look at some important real-world topics through the lens of some popular media tropes. This time around, I want to start things off not with a general concept, but instead a specific character study, as we take a look at the original Blue Ranger himself, Billy. Let's dive in. Although never fully named in the series itself, William Cranston, better known as Billy, was introduced to the world on August 28, 1993, in the very first episode of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Day of the Dumpster. Portrayed by David Yost, Billy was initially presented to us as a first-time karate student, who was clearly different from his more athletically driven friends. Despite clearly being a quick study, he lacked confidence in his abilities, and had something of a different vocabulary from those around him.
A fully sentient, multifunctional automaton. Never seen anything like it.
But you know what? Let's talk to an expert.
Okay, back when I was a kid and the show first aired, I attached to Billy pretty immediately because I could relate to him. The glasses, the unfashionable clothes, the using big words and getting blank stares from people around you whose vocabularies weren't as big, the being bad at athletic stuff. Also, the poor guy really had trouble picking up when someone was into him. Like, he was literally an old man by the time he figured this stuff out. But more so than any of that, it meant a lot to me that Billy changed and grew and developed over his time on the show, but he also didn't force himself to be something he wasn't. He stayed himself, but he also got more confident and less awkward, and he had friends who valued him for who he was at every stage of that journey. He also, from day one, looked at all the stuff he wasn't good at and faced it head on. He kept trying the things that didn't come easily to him, and it worked, and he got better at those things. So I guess overall, he and the arc his character took gave me hope that if he could do better, so could I. Something to aspire to on my own journey. And also, just David Yost, he's an incredible person. He's been through so much. He gives excellent hugs. And I love him, and I love Billy, and I'm not crying, you're crying.
Are you okay?
Uh-huh.
I'll give you a moment.
Thank you.
Needless to say, Billy went on to become an incredibly important element of the Power Rangers franchise, ultimately acting as the longest-serving member of the original team, and the only person to hold the title of the Blue Mighty Morphin Power Ranger, not including his ancestor William. So when it came time to revisit the character in Saban's 2017 Power Rangers movie, the producers wanted to recapture that same feeling of relatability and representation for people who don't exactly fit in with everyone else, while also being a little bit more grounded in reality than a high school genius who develops flying cars, builds portal devices, and negotiates peace on alien planets.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Billy Cranston. Our kids used to call me Billy Crams. Dilly! Stop.
When R.J. Kyler took on the role of Billy, he brought with him a lot of the humor, heart, awkwardness, intelligence, and confidence struggles that made the character so memorable to so many people. This version also took a theorized interpretation of Billy's character traits and decided to make that interpretation explicit for the first time with a clear explanation.
I gotta tell you something, okay? I'm on the spectrum.
Well, is that like a workout program? Like Taibo?
Jason may be joking around here, but the autism spectrum is pretty widely misunderstood and misinterpreted, leading to a lot of misrepresentation in popular media. So, let's dig into that. What is autism? What does it mean to be on the spectrum? And how does that compare to what we see in popular media? Liz, would you like to help me out on this one?
Okay, so, autism, Asperger's syndrome, childhood disintegrative disorder, Rett disorder, and pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified were all categorized separately under disorders usually diagnosed in childhood until 2013, when the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM-5, reclassified all of these diagnoses under the more general term of autism spectrum disorders. Basically, all the different diagnoses had so much in common, but also such a huge range of different presentations, that it basically made more sense to place everything under the autism spectrum umbrella. And that really comes down to two key criteria: atypical social communication and restricted behaviors or interests.
Now, I want to be clear. When we refer to it as a spectrum, we're not talking about a straight linear scale, right?
Yeah, no. One of the controversial things that pops up when people talk about the autism spectrum is the idea that it refers to a simple range from high functioning at one end to low functioning at the other. It's really a lot more complicated than that, not to mention that autistic people do not like being labeled in that way. Sure, different presentations can have different levels of severity, but people can be perfectly fine in circumstances that might be severely challenging for others, and vice versa.
So if we were to put things in physics terms, because I'm sure that simplifies things, we're not really looking at a frequency spectrum from high to low, but instead something more like the color spectrum. Sure, we have a range of red to violet, but we also have differences in brightness and saturation, and can mix and match colors to create a near infinite range of combinations.
Exactly. Atypical social communication, for example, could mean totally nonverbal, or it could mean you just have no verbal filter and say whatever pops into your head. Or maybe you alternate between being very quiet and completely opening up when the conversation turns to a personal interest. Restricted behaviors could mean anything from repetitive movements or repetitive vocal patterns to having a very intense level of focus on a specific topic, like math, science, trains, sports, or spandex-clad superheroes.
That is not spandex!
We can address that later. Let's go back to Billy for a moment. Although it underperformed at the box office, one of the highlights of the Power Rangers movie was definitely R.J. Cyler's performance, which was hailed as one of the most accurate presentations of an autistic character in modern film.
2017 Billy is great because he's not super exaggerated. They didn't forget that he's still supposed to be a real person, while also showing a lot of different elements of how autism influences behaviors and personality. He has clear atypical social communication as he struggles to speak out in tense situations, doesn't realize when he's rambling, uses practiced internal scripts for all of his introductions, and explicitly states that he doesn't get jokes or sarcasm. None of this prevents him from having a full range of emotions and forming deeply meaningful relationships with the people close to him. He also presents restricted behaviors, like placing his pencils in precise order, focusing intensely on demolitions and maps, being averse to touch, and making little hand claps when he's excited. And yes, he is adorable, and I absolutely love him too.
Also, and I feel like I can't stress this enough, Billy Cranston was the first explicitly autistic superhero ever presented on film.
Gasp! Representation?
And yes, I know that Reed Richards has been described as autistic in the comics, but that didn't pop up until about 50 years into the character's history, and has still never been a part of his film or television portrayals.
Representation in media is incredibly important for people in marginalized groups or people who feel like they don't fit in with the rest of society and may be struggling to communicate with others. They want to see stories that they can relate to, and they deserve positive role models. And if you look at how autism is usually portrayed in media, a lot of these characters aren't necessarily relatable to autistic people themselves, as they play into stereotypes at the more extreme ends of the spectrum. These characters are either magical savants with supernatural intelligence, or else basically a prop for other characters to deal with, as their autism either fully defines who they are, or is treated as an affliction to be overcome. And since that's not really what autism is or how it works, people who actually are on the spectrum tend to look for other characters that better reflect their actual experiences, even if those characters aren't explicitly autistic or have backgrounds that otherwise explain but also mimic autistic traits. Look at Bridge from Power Rangers SPD. Bridge is awesome. He also doesn't always understand social etiquette, has a tendency to ramble, goes on weird tangents, hyper-focuses on things that others might not notice, and has atypical physical mannerisms like standing on his head or waggling his fingers. Plus, the guy's fixated on toast. Or you could go outside Power Rangers and look at Super Sentai. In Uchi Sentai Q Ranger, Naga struggles with how to express his emotions, and despite regularly making mistakes, he fixates on getting it right. At times, he convinces himself he doesn't even have real emotions, because he doesn't present them in the same way as everyone else, but his deep connections to his friends prove that wrong. Plus, his relationship with Balance is absolutely adorable, and I love them both, and they are my children.
Now, I will note that both of these are still somewhat fantastical examples. Bridges' quirks and aversion to touch could be tied into his aura-reading precognitive telepathy powers, and Naga is, well, an alien from another planet where emotions are discouraged. If you're looking for a more grounded example in the world of Toku, I'd say that you can't go wrong with Masao Mondo, better known as Zhuo the World, from Dobutsu Sentai Zhuoja. Masao has tremendous difficulty regulating his emotions, alternating between severe depression and manic hyperactivity. Although he is clearly traumatized by the experience of being brainwashed into becoming an evil ranger, it's made equally clear that his atypical behaviors predate these events. He's never really fit in with a group of friends before, as he often either comes on too strong or obsesses over every little mistake, yet he's shown to be incredibly driven and focused when he sets his mind to something. He also proves to be highly adept at an eclectic array of hobbies, including sewing, cooking, and fishing, and is a virtually unstoppable force on the battlefield. None of the characters that we've just now brought up are explicitly autistic, any more than the original Billy was. But that doesn't mean they're not good examples of representation, just like how if a real person hasn't received an official diagnosis, that doesn't mean they're not on the spectrum.
Yes, self-diagnosis is valid. Formal evaluations can be very expensive, and not everyone has access to them. Plus, since autism presents as a very broad spectrum of behaviors, and behaviors change as people get older and adapt to social challenges, it gets harder for an outside observer to readily identify autism in adults. Remember, no one knows your personal experiences better than you do. If you're well informed and you believe that you fit the criteria, you deserve to work with a mental health professional who will respect that and work with you from that mutual understanding.
Feeling like you are being understood and like your experiences are valid is something that is important. And if you're someone who experiences the world a little differently and focuses on things that other people don't really think about and feels like they're always doing something wrong when they try to connect with people, then that can be very difficult. And even if you, say, spend 10 years doing high school and college theater to develop your ability to express yourself and interact with other people, it doesn't mean that you weren't once voted the quietest kid in your middle school. And it doesn't erase those speech therapy lessons. And just because you've found ways to connect your interests to the interests of others, doesn't mean that it's not still a struggle to focus on things that don't relate back to your favorite superhero show, or to keep that from dominating your conversations. Just because you've learned how to hide it, that doesn't mean that it's gone.
Again, self-diagnosis is valid.
Yeah, I may be speaking from a bit of experience on that. And it's one of the reasons that I've always loved running the trivia contest at Power Morphicon, because it's not just about me embracing my special interest. It's about giving others the opportunity to embrace theirs and be celebrated for something that previously might have made them feel like outsiders. Because I feel like that's something that's fairly common in the Power Rangers fandom. Or at least more common here than elsewhere.
I've noticed that too. Reasons for this may vary between autistic fans, but may include the show having a clear repetitive format, the clear and unambiguous interpretations of morality, and just the sheer volume of minutia for fans to absorb and fixate on. Seriously, how many episodes are we up to now?
881 at the moment, assuming you go by the official count, which discounts the 2010 reversioning and includes Clash of the Red Rangers as a single episode, despite being an hour-long one-time special, with us looking at a count of 883 by the end of the month. Not that I'm keeping track of that in my head or anything.
Of course not.
Anyway, speaking of things that are going on this month, let's not forget that April is Autism Acceptance Month. So this is the perfect opportunity to remember the people of the autism community and to let them feel heard. Listen to their experiences. Ask them about their interests. All it takes is a little bit of patience and understanding, and you would be amazed at how big of a difference that makes.
Also, if you'd like to learn more about autism and how to support the autism community, feel free to look into organizations like Autism Network International and the Autism Self-Advocacy Network. Groups like these are run by and for people on the autism spectrum to assist with community organizing, advocacy, and employment assistance. There's also the Actually Autistic hashtag on Twitter, where you can learn more about people's personal experiences. It's really important that people on the spectrum are not excluded from these conversations.
Thanks, Liz. And thanks for joining me.
No problem. I'm always up for talking about social issues, mental health, and heroes in multicolored spandex.
That is not spandex.
Oh, right. We never came back to Dr. K. Any thoughts?
She leans a bit into the insufferable genius tropes, and a lot of her behaviors can be chalked up to her isolated upbringing and personal trauma. But if you're an autistic person who relates to her character, that's still totally valid.
Awesome. And don't forget, you can hear more from Liz at the Toku Ladies podcast.
Yay! Shameless plug!
And don't forget to tune into our channel for the continuing saga of the long-running Database Rangers Power Reviews web series, weekly live reactions to Sentai and Power Rangers episodes, and, of course, special bonus videos like these, Conversations in Context. Just as before, since we are looking for these to be conversations, please comment below with your own experiences. And let's make the most of Autism Acceptance Month by continuing to work together to spread awareness, understanding, and acceptance for the autism community worldwide. We've got a long road ahead and a lot of work to do. So until next time, farewell, Ranger fans, and let the power protect you.
They're all so soft and wonderful. I can't say that and not laugh.